Welcome to Caring Heart on Armed Forces Radio. Caring Heart is a program where we discuss the rights and privileges of persons with disabilities. I am your host, Comrade Chris Abu, and today we'll be discussing a very critical issue. We'll be looking at the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act of 2018. So, we want to look at why has it that the implementation remains so slow, despite that the 5 years transitory period is already over. And to do this today, to navigate this very important conversation, we have a very distinguished guest in the house, somebody we respect so much in the community of persons with disabilities, and it's no other person than Mr. Theophilus Odaudu. He is the program manager at the Disability Rights Fund, an organization that has been at the forefront of supporting organizations of persons with disabilities to carry out programs that will promote the rights of persons with disabilities. Theo, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome. That it is the first time you're coming to my program.
That's true.
Thank you very much for making our time, despite your busy schedule to be here with me. So, to begin, for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with the law, I would love to, please, can you give maybe a little overview of discrimination against persons with disabilities prohibition act of 2018?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, listeners. The Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act was passed into law in January of 2019, and the law set out to protect persons with disabilities from discrimination and to also ensure that the society government policies and programs are inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities. So it contains a lot of provisions ranging from prohibitions of discrimination to the right of persons with disabilities to education, to health, accessibility, and all forms of rights that are available for persons with disabilities. So the law came as a result of demands from the disability community and other stakeholders, realizing that the world is moving towards protecting the rights of persons with disabilities. And without a local legislation, persons with disabilities in Nigeria are left vulnerable. So this is a law that set out to provide that protection for persons with disabilities to be able to stand for their rights and ensure that they are treated equally like every other one else in the society.
Thank you very much for providing this insight and breaking it down for people to actually understand what the law covers. And now that the Act has the Act actually provided for 5 years transitory period for public and private sectors to actually comply, maybe create access, making buildings, do adjustments, try to make sure that public buildings, transportation systems, workplaces are made accessible for persons with disabilities. And now the period has ended, but we're still seeing that there's a lack of implementation. What is happening?
Okay, thank you very much. I would say that the law has a lot of innovative provisions that is supposed to ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities are protected. But again, there are several factors why this law or the implementation is still very slow. You see that when the law provides for 5 years, one mistake that I see people make is that you think that this 5 years is like a pause period for the law. The 5 years moratorium that the law provides was actually for physical structure to be made accessible. What this means is other aspects of the law were effective right from the day it was signed. And this 5 year was not a period for people to go and sleep and begin implementation after 5 years, but it's supposed to be a period to prepare so that when the law comes into full effect, you are not caught on guard, off guard But again, we see that what happened in many quarters is that a lot of people did not know about this law, and that takes me to one of the first problem, which is a lack of awareness. People do not know about this law, and so did not prepare for these 5 years. I cannot think of one institution that fully prepared for the 5 year moratorium period. A lot of people just went to bed, and no one remembers that this law will come into effect fully after 5 years. Like I said, the aspect that has to do with physical accessibility, the aspect that has to do with constructing buildings that are accessible, modifying existing buildings to comply with all accessibility standards. So apart from the accessibility code that the commission developed, there was really no effort even from the government to ensure that they are prepared for this. So that lack of awareness on what the law actually means and how it should play is one of the things that's slowing down the implementation pace. I think another thing is this is another awareness among persons with disabilities themselves. Even though we all know that this law is there, you hear persons with disabilities talk about it, but it doesn't look like we all know what the rights that are contained in the law means and how it protects us. For example, you want to ask 66 years now since the law came into effect, how many cases have been litigated in court on the violation of the rights of persons with disabilities? Yet we have cases of discrimination every day. So this law has not received full judicial interpretation. And then it raised the issue of whether or not um, we, the disability community, are also ready to take that route, because that is one way that can quicken implementation. By the time one or two individuals and institutions get judgments against them and they have to face the penalty that are contained in the law, you see that many others will begin to sit up, but we are yet to do that. So it's another charge for persons with disabilities. I also think that lack of funds is another thing. Yes, we have a disability commission which is saddled with the responsibility of implementing the law. However, that institution is poorly resourced. In a conversation last week, I got to understand that the budget for that commission is maybe about 2 billion for the whole year.
2.1 billion.
Now, 2.1 billion for the whole year for the number of persons with disabilities that we have, and for the enormous work that that commission has to do. You see that it's grossly underfunded. And when we don't have that funds to do, there's just little that can be done. So these are some of the reasons that I think is slowing down the implementation. We need that political will, because it doesn't look like a lot of government institutions that are that are affected by the law are doing what they are supposed to do to ensure that this law is implemented and benefits the people for whom it was enacted.
Wow, thank you very much. But I also want to, because that's one area that is so dear to me, which is about economic empowerment of persons with disabilities. So I always want to talk about it. So can we talk about, because I know that the Act actually mandated that at least 5%, jobs, employment opportunities should be reserved for persons with disabilities. Do you have an idea of what government is doing so far in order to address this? I think it's section 29 of the Act.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that provision, it's more like an affirmative provision to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to employment. And it provides that at least 5% of all employment be reserved for persons with disabilities. Um, First of all, it says at least, it means it can be more.
More, yeah.
But again, we have not even achieved that 5%.
Yes.
I know that recently there's a lot of conversation around how this can happen. But I want to say that we've not seen a lot of action in that regard. Uh, Day in, day out, we hear different institutions advertise for positions to recruit people to different government institutions, but we do not see any indication that the rate of poverty among persons with disabilities is still on the increase, because there's just a thin line between poverty and disability. And there are a lot of disability related expenses that persons with disabilities have to do, and that's the more reason why they have to have this access to employment. But I don't think that a lot is being done in that regard beyond the lip service that we do here day in, day out, that people say, oh, this is there, but nothing much is put in place.
So what can persons with disabilities do? Your organization supports a lot of them. On this issue of employment opportunity, there is employment quota. So what would they do in order to get the MDAs, government agencies, to actually implement?
So I think there is a lot that persons with disabilities and their organizations can do. First of all, OPDs, that is organizations of persons with disabilities, need to become more strategic. We first of all need to realize that we are all fighting for the same goal and join our voices together so that it will be loud. We need to keep pushing. We need to keep calling. We don't have to relent to ensure that there are clear policies, clear guidelines put in place to ensure the implementation of that section of the law and even other sections. You see, beyond advocacy, beyond creating awareness or shouting, like I said earlier, these are actionable provisions. And if you feel discriminated against, why don't we try litigating? Why don't you try litigation and see how far that will go? Because again, we have courts of law and we have a legislation that has been enacted into law. So we should be able to call people to order. And when they fail to listen to us, we should be able to go to court and say we've been discriminated against. There are provisions, there are penalties. And the court can actually mandate the government, the institutions that are in violation, to comply with that law. So I think we need to be strategic and diversify using different advocacy strategies that will help us realize this goal. So for me, I would say the first thing is not to give up, to keep pushing, but be very intentional and strategic in the things we demand for, so that we have clear strategies, clear guidelines and policies we can hold on to say this is what the law provides, this is the regulations that are in place, and we demand that this be complied with.
All right, thank you. Then 2 days ago, March 1st was actually the International Wheelchair Day. It was also another day to actually remind us about the challenges that wheelchair users are facing. So, and one of them is access. Access is a very major concern for persons with disabilities. So in Nigeria, we see fine public buildings, transportation, several other even services not really accessible for persons with disabilities. So why has this aspect of the law been so ignored?
Yes, so I think that yes, accessibility is a very important concept and a very important right for persons with disability. Physical accessibility is there, that's the environment. We need to also have like access to information and a lot of things. So accessibility is very broad,
Yeah.
and there's no aspect of it that I would say persons with disabilities are enjoying a lot of access, because it's a struggle all through. And I think that the government is yet to realize how important this provision is to persons with disabilities. Because if you have an office that a wheelchair user cannot go in, that means you are locking that person out of the services that are being provided in that place. So access is a key aspect of disability right that needs to be complied with. So I think that why it seems to be neglected, I know a lot of people will give the excuse of what it takes to modify the buildings.
The expensive
And
nature of it.
yeah, the people are looking at that cost, but not so many people are looking at the advantage you will get when you finally do this modification. And again, that's why the moratorium gave that 5 years period to be able to modify, so that you are able to put yourself together and modify this building. And from the moment the law was enacted, every building that's coming up is supposed to have all the accessibility features, because that's what the law says. But again, we neglect this from the beginning. constructions happen every day. Government buildings are springing up everywhere.